Chapter 21 Major Discovery: The murderer is a left-handed person. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He-Yong knew that it was meaningless to keep talking tough. He had already broken down emotionally, slamming his head against the interrogation chair, and bursting into tears and snot. However, these tears were obviously shed because of the fear of legal sanctions, and they were as worthless as crocodile tears. There might be a little regret, but it was useless. If I had known this would happen, I would not have done it in the first place. 3 hours later, with enough evidence to convict, He-Yong finally explained how he tricked the deceased into the car and committed every process, every detail, and even the psychological changes of the crime. With He-Yong's confession this time and the previous evidence, the trial of this murder and corpse disposal case was pushed forward very quickly. The 3 suspects related to the case, He Lianshan, who violated morality and had no clear crime, was rescued by his wife. Because the matter of keeping a lover was exposed, he ended up leaving the house with nothing. The shares of the trading company that he originally held were also taken back by his father-in-law without mercy. From a big boss with rich assets, he fell to the bottom in an instant. His former glory and assets are gone, and Su Igua, who committed the crime of stealing the victim's body, because he committed multiple crimes such as theft, insulting corpses, and harboring crimes, but because of his good attitude of confession and considering that no serious consequences were caused, he was finally sentenced to 4 years in prison. As for the murderer of this case, He-Yong, after sorting out the files several times, the judge also gave a very fair trial, because before the murder, the victim had already chosen to end their relationship. There was no betrayal, but He-Yong's relentless unilateral harassment. And He-Yong's idea of killing was premeditated, not that the two were quarreling and He-Yong could not control his emotions and had an accident. This is pure intentional homicide. After the murder, he did not choose to surrender, but instead took the approach of throwing the body away to avoid it, which caused a great bad impact on the society. At the same time, when facing the police interrogation, he tried to get away with it, and did not choose to directly confess the facts of the crime, and there was no reason for any discretionary leniency. Finally sentenced to death, deprived of political rights for life. Of course, the details of the court and He-Yong's application for appeal are all later in this case. On the 3rd day after the case occurred, He-Yong, who was determined to be guilty, was sent to the detention center, waiting for the specific judgment of the court. In less than a day, the murder case was solved, and it was basically led by Su Ming, who had not yet graduated. It was undoubtedly an extremely amazing thing, but the job of criminal police is to solve cases, and the internship period was shortened some time ago, so the police force did not give any special rewards, but only gave a bonus of 500 yuan at the end of the month. In the Huaihai Criminal Investigation Brigade, Su Ming has been idle again, carefully analyzing various clues and files about the dismemberment case of Magic City University. Of course, murders do not happen every day. When there is no mission, analyzing these unsolved case files can also gain a lot. As for Wang Hu, he completely turned to the direction of criminal investigation technology. Now he is learning from his predecessors how to repair mobile phones, restore clues, and observe and analyze the sky eye surveillance of each street. Criminal police are different from public security police. The number of cases that need to be handled every year may not be large, but they are basically all serious and major cases. So, if a case is solved quickly, there will still be a lot of rest time. Just like now, Xu Changsheng, who is also waiting for tasks with nothing to do, holding a cup of steaming wolfberry water, he slowly came to Su Ming's side. He turned his head to look at the computer screen, blew away the hot steam in the cup and took a sip, and asked casually, "The file of the 5.13 dismemberment case. Director Lin asked you to look at it, right? Are there any new discoveries and gains?" Su Ming did not look up at Xu Changsheng, but shook his head gently and sighed helplessly. "There are indeed some discoveries and gains, but are they useful for this case from 20 years ago? I'm not sure. Because 20 years is really too long. If I was at the crime scene at the time, I might be able to capture the traces left by the murderer. But it's really too difficult now, but I can be 100% sure. As long as this murderer commits a crime again, with that special style of committing crimes, he will definitely be able to dig out further clues." It's obvious, this is Su Ming's unique confidence. These days, by watching and analyzing these files, Su Ming can actually roughly judge. This 5.13 Magic City University dismemberment case is not as perfect and difficult to solve as it seems, however, because of the backwardness of various criminal investigation methods 20 years ago, and the wrong direction of investigation at the beginning. The murderer has been at large until now. For example, after this dismemberment case, basically all the criminal investigation focuses on finding other body parts and the social relationships of the victim. The body parts were not analyzed in time, causing the possible clues to slip away. Xu Changsheng standing next to him, hearing that Su Ming had gained something and found a new clue, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Xiao Ming. Is it true? The files on this case have been almost torn apart by us. Can you still find new clues? When I first came to the brigade, the Forestry Bureau also asked me to check the files on this case, but didn't I check all the places that should be checked? Are there any clues? However, Xiao Ming, you are right. If the murderer of this unsolved case dares to continue committing crimes, he will definitely be caught and brought to justice with today's eyesight and various advanced criminal investigation methods. But it's a pity. Now nearly 20 years have passed, and the murderer of this mutilation case seems to have disappeared from the world. Similar criminal methods have not appeared for so many years. Sometimes I wonder, is this murderer no longer alive? Still, the murderer who could commit such a brutal mutilation of corpses is really sober and refrains from committing any more crimes to give us the chance to find him. It's really unknown what the reason is. Or so. If the Forest Bureau hadn't been able to let go of this corpse dismemberment case, I'm afraid this case would have been forgotten and the real murderer would never have been found. Actually, when criminal investigation technology was not so advanced, the number of unsolved cases is not small, and many of them were eventually lost to history because the murderer could never be found. It is an unsolved case that will be brought up again from time to time, like this case of the corpse dismemberment at Shanghai University. Really, pitifully little. Now, Xu Changsheng sighed softly, shook his head and continued. That's a lot to say. Back to the topic, Xiao Ming, what new clues did you find? Feelings about Xu Changsheng. Su Ming did not express too many opinions. He opened a few pictures of the victim's corpse that he had saved in the file and spoke seriously. Brother Sheng. Many people can figure out the murderer of this corpse dismemberment case. He is good at knife skills, has strong psychological endurance, has extremely severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, etc. There are no clues to accurately determine his identity. But I saw a message from the cuts and texture of the victim's body. The murderer's understanding of the human body is far greater than what we originally speculated, because he used a hand he is not used to cut the victim's body. Keep it simple. The murderer is a lefty. Chapter 22. Su Ming brings a new criminal investigation technique, shocking Xu Changsheng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The murderer is a left-handed person. This conclusion made Xu Changsheng stunned for a moment, then, he immediately stepped forward and looked at the screen, his face full of astonishment and confusion. No, Xiao Ming. How did you judge that the murderer is a left-handed person? As for the muscle texture and incision of the cooked corpse, don't they have a certain degree of randomness? Can they still be used as clues to infer? Obviously, Su Ming judged the murderer's dominant hand by the incision and texture of the victim's body. This point, it really exceeded Xu Changsheng's understanding, because, in criminal investigation, judging the murder weapon and attack direction by the victim's wound is a technology that exists and is also a common technique for solving cases, but this case of dismemberment at Magic City University has a significant premise, that is, the victim's body was cooked in advance and then cut into small pieces. Xu Changsheng has never seen. In this case, it is also possible to judge the killer's dominant hand through the texture and incision. Looking at Xu Changsheng's astonished expression, Su Ming was not surprised at all, and had already expected it, because, looking for clues through the cooked corpse's muscles and textures has long been beyond the ability of normal criminal police. In real criminal investigation, it is also extremely difficult to judge the killer's dominant hand, and it can even be said that it is impossible to do it, because when the killer commits the crime, he basically does whatever is natural, convenient, and can achieve the goal, even if the killer in a certain case is left-handed. But in order to achieve the purpose of killing, it is very likely that when he sees that his right hand is closer to the murder weapon, he will directly pick it up and attack the victim under the effect of adrenaline. Because there are too many uncertainties, it is extremely difficult to judge the dominant hand. Like in TV dramas, it is simply impossible to judge the dominant hand by just looking at the wound. If Su Ming had not used various murder methods to try to achieve the requirements of a perfect crime, he would definitely not notice such details. It is even more impossible to be so confident. The murderer is a left-handed person. At this moment, Su Ming pasted two different photos of the victims' body in front of the screen. Brother Sheng. It sounds incredible to get clues through muscle texture and incision, but I will explain it briefly. You will know why I can come to this conclusion. At this point, Su Ming did not hesitate at all, and pointed to the photo of the victim's body above. This photo, it was the first bag of body parts of the victim found, which was taken away by the sanitation worker as cooked beef and almost eaten. Brother Sheng, take a good look. The muscle texture of the victim's body in this picture is obviously deeper on the right and shallower on the left, and the cut is also clearer on the right. You can imagine it in your mind. At this time, a large piece of meat is placed on the chopping board. When a normal person cuts meat, he will definitely use more force at the beginning, because he doesn't need to worry about the knife hitting the chopping board. And when he cuts to the last point, he will subconsciously reduce the force to avoid making too loud a sound. This is everyone's inertia, or subconscious behavior, and if you are in the murderer's environment, you will definitely pay more attention to the size of the sound. Such force and impact. The force method will cause the area where the force is greater to have clearer texture and cuts than the area where the force is applied. When the murderer cut the victim's body, he was actually more careful than when we cut meat normally, which would definitely cause this uneven use of force. Now the body parts in the picture. The texture and cuts on the right are obviously clearer than those on the left. According to the normal meat cutting posture of a person, it is undoubtedly cut with the right hand. This information means, when cutting the victim's body, the murderer cut with the right hand. This explanation from shallow to deep, it made Xu Changsheng secretly take a breath of cold air, and his right hand was placed horizontally and vertically in the shape of a hand knife, cutting down in the air to feel the change of force. The result, just as Su Ming said, once you feel that you are about to touch the cutting board, you will subconsciously reduce the force. This is the inertia of the human body that is difficult to overcome. After confirming that this clue can be verified, Xu Changsheng sucked his teeth hard, put down the wolfberry water in his hand, and frowned even more. Xiao Ming, your method of judging the dominant hand by texture and incision. I can generally agree with 90% of it. But I feel that the application scope of this criminal investigation technology is also very narrow. After all, there are not many criminal suspects who can be like the murderer of the dismemberment case in Shanghai. Cooking the body so calmly and dismembering it carefully, most of them may not have time to dispose of the body, but here it can determine the dominant hand. But it's very strange, judging by this detail. The dominant hand of the murderer should be the right hand, not the left hand. How did Xiao Ming get the clue of left-handedness? Although the application scope of this criminal investigation technology is very narrow, but now there are also real gains, from those corpse photos from 20 years ago, the key clues found. Xu Changsheng had to admit that Su Ming's talent for solving cases was amazing and terrifying. As a criminal policeman for so many years, he never thought that it was actually possible to judge each person's dominant hand from the different strength of cutting meat, but he was getting more and more confused. Obviously, now through the body parts, it can be judged that the dominant hand is the right hand, but why is Su Ming so sure that the murderer is left-handed? It didn't let Xu Changsheng doubt for too long. Su Ming pointed to the corpse photo below. This photo, it is a photo of the victim's cooked head. The multi-angle display looks particularly hideous and terrifying, enough to give ordinary people nightmares. Brother Sheng, look carefully at the cut on the neck. You should be able to see it very clearly according to the technique we use to determine the direction of the body parts cut. On both sides of the cervical vertebrae of the neck, one side has more obvious muscle texture, while the other side is a bit fuzzy and unclear. But it is different from the direction of the previous body parts. The muscle texture on this neck is more obvious on the left side, while the right side is the result of the murderer's obvious reduction of strength. It can be concluded that the murderer held the knife with his left hand to cut the victim's body and head. Now there are two completely different answers. When cutting the body parts, the murderer held the knife with his right hand, and when cutting the head, he held the knife with his left hand. It seems difficult to distinguish, but in fact, you can get the answer with just a little thought. Since the body parts are pure muscle, the murderer does not need to use special force, and when cutting the head, because of the existence of the spine bone, the murderer must exert more strength. At this moment, there is no need for Su Ming to continue explaining. Xu Changsheng slapped his thigh suddenly, and said excitedly with sudden realization. When cutting hard objects or lifting heavy objects, everyone will subconsciously use their dominant hand to provide greater strength. This is unavoidable. So by comparing the two things of cutting the body parts and cutting the neck bones, we can draw a very clear conclusion. The murderer is left-handed, so he used his left hand to cut the bones. The reason why he used his right hand to cut the body parts was actually a deliberate cover-up to confuse the police and clear his suspicion. But why do you deliberately hide your left-handedness? Although there are fewer left-handed people among ordinary people, it should not be necessary to deliberately hide it, unless it is. At this point, Xu Changsheng paused for 2 seconds, looked at Su Ming with a gleam in his eyes. Unless it is. The murderer's profession is somewhat special, plus the characteristic of being left-handed, it is easy to find him. Chapter 23. A sudden case occurs, the situation is urgent and we must solve it with all our strength. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As a criminal police officer, the most needed ability is the kind of logical thinking that can push from 1 to 5 through a seemingly simple and unimportant clue. Further details of the case were revealed, leading to possible suspects, like now. Through this clue that Su Ming dug up, Xu Changsheng reacted immediately. If it were a normal criminal suspect, he would never deliberately hide his left-handed identity, because it is completely unnecessary, unless this murderer thinks, as long as the police discover his identity as a left-hander, they only need to combine other clues and follow the clues to find him out. That's all. Why would a murderer with such a high criminal IQ waste so much time deliberately hiding his left-handedness? Being left-handed is not a typical characteristic, but it may be possible to narrow down the scope of suspects by linking it to something. All it takes is a little thought. This thing that can narrow the scope is instantly ready to appear, that is, a special profession with not many people engaged in it. Sort out all the details in your mind. Xu Changsheng finally understood how meaningful Su Ming's discovery was. It could be said to be a truly major breakthrough, but he sighed helplessly. Oh, what a shame. If this clue and detail could have been discovered at the first time 20 years ago, perhaps we could have found the murderer through this line of elimination one by one. But now, 20 years have passed, and many things have changed. Even many professions have withdrawn from the stage of history, and it is impossible to explore them at all. The file of this mutilation case. Xu Changsheng also read it carefully several times, so it is naturally clear that after the crime occurred 20 years ago, the direction of the investigation was to screen roast duck restaurants, braised meat restaurants, slaughterhouses, and the social areas of the deceased, etc. No consideration was given to special professions in which a small number of people could identify suspects by being left-handed. This has to be said, the traces of the murderer's dominant hand that were specially concealed did not actually play a big role, because from the beginning, the police's investigation direction was wrong and they were too obsessed with finding all the remains, resulting in missing the golden 48 hours to solve the case, more because no important clues such as handedness were found, leaving the case clueless. Su Ming nodded in agreement, closed the 2 photos of the victim's body pulled up on the computer screen, and said with regret, "There really is nothing we can do. Unless the murderer of this mutilation case commits another crime, leaving us with new opportunities and clues, or we can find other new evidence from these files. Otherwise, I'm afraid it will be difficult to detect the case of mutilation of corpses at Shanghai University." Maybe the murderer's crime was not perfect at the time, and there were even many flaws and loopholes. But after 20 years, all imperfections have become perfect. It's obvious, through file analysis during this period, Su Ming has been able to roughly confirm that the 5.13 Morta University corpse dismemberment case was not as exaggerated and perfect as described on the internet. At least, if he could have taken over the case at that time, you can definitely peel off all kinds of details and clues, catch the hidden murderer, and let him accept the punishment of the law. This is not blind confidence, but in the process of simulating crimes, I have personally used many criminal techniques and have an in-depth understanding of various criminal investigation methods, which brings me confidence. Xu Changsheng restrained his inner wonder. He picked up the wolfberry water next to him again and was about to continue saying something. The door to the innermost director's office suddenly opened. Lin Tian, who was wearing a white-lined police uniform, walked out slowly. Frowning slightly as if thinking about something, but Xu Changsheng already waved hello. "Master, come and take a look." Xiao Ming, just based on these files and photos of the victims, I found new clues to the 5.13 corpse case. I just did a little analysis, and I feel that if it hadn't been 20 years ago, it is really possible to dig out the murderer through this clue discovered by Xiao Ming. What a pity now. But there should be a certain chance to find other clues or... Xu Changsheng's words. Lin Tian was obviously moved, and he turned his head to look at Su Ming in surprise. He didn't expect that he was just trying to let Su Ming look at the file of this case. Result: I really found a new clue, but now is not the time to dwell on this unsolved case from 20 years ago. A more urgent matter has arisen. He immediately lowered his hand and interrupted the conversation. Xiao Su, we'll talk about the 5.13 dismemberment case later. I have an emergency here. I need you to lead a team to deal with it immediately. Xiao Ming will also follow me to see if I can find anything. I just received a call from the principal of Shud Middle School in Huainan District. A junior high school girl slipped and died in an abandoned teaching building. There is a high possibility of homicide. We must go to investigate as soon as possible. This case. Since the deceased is a minor and the body was found by a student, it has caused a certain panic and commotion. Perhaps the media has also received the news. So you must remember. Without a definite conclusion, you must never draw any conclusions in front of the school or parents, especially the media, which will affect the credibility of our police. Speaking of this, Lin Tian pursed his lips and paused for 2 seconds to think, and then said without question. Because the case is special. Xiao Su, let Shen Lin, a forensic doctor, put down his work first and go on a mission with you. The cause of death must be determined in the shortest time. Then, if there is any situation that cannot be solved, call me immediately. Rush to Shud Middle School now. I will send you other details on the way. Don't waste time. Seeing that the case is so urgent and related to minors, Xu Changsheng immediately restrained his joking expression, stood very seriously, and saluted. Received. I guarantee to complete the task. After speaking, he immediately put down the wolfberry thermos cup in his hand, took out the police car key from the drawer, and threw it to Su Ming without delay. Let's go, Xiao Ming, you go to the parking lot and wait for me. I'll go to the technical department to find Shen, the forensic doctor, and go to the scene with us. This case is very stressful. Chapter 24: A middle school falling case full of doubts, Su Ming's ultimate ability to capture C. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Police cars with sirens blaring speed down the road. Xu Changsheng was driving in the driver's seat, and Su Ming was still sitting in the passenger seat, one who did not follow the action this time. He used advanced equipment to provide technical support at any time in the Criminal Investigation Technology section of the brigade, and the back row. Search TWKAN on Google. She is a young and beautiful woman who is wearing a white coat, gold-rimmed half-rimmed glasses, and a light mole at the corner of her eye, full of femininity. The autopsy kit next to her clearly explained her identity. Shen Lin is the only forensic doctor in the Huaihai Criminal Investigation Brigade, although he is only 30 years old this year. He has 12 years of work experience, and his grandfather Shensu is the earliest generation of forensic doctors in Shanghai. Since adulthood, Shenlin did not fall in love or go out to bars with makeup like other girls. Instead, she chose to learn various autopsy techniques from Shensu. I don't know if it's just a matter of hearing and seeing it, or if it's because of my outstanding talent. In just 5 years, Shenlin mastered all the autopsy techniques of her grandfather, and even showed that she had surpassed Shensu in some places. Because of this, the old forensic doctor Shensu finally retired with peace of mind, and was replaced by the genius forensic Dr. Shenlin, who worked in the technical department of the Huaihai Criminal Investigation Brigade. Because Shenlin's identity is somewhat special, not only does he have the aura of a genius forensic doctor, but he also has a relationship with the senior forensic Dr. Shensu. Therefore, except Lin Tian, no one in the Criminal Investigation Brigade dared to order her to do anything. As for feelings, that makes people even more helpless. After all, the identity of a forensic doctor who deals with corpses all day long is enough to put off most boys. There are still 10 minutes away from Shid Middle School. Xu Changsheng glanced sideways at Su Ming, then glanced at Shenlin through the car's interior mirror, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel and speaking softly. This is a case at Shid Middle School. We did not receive the alarm received by the police, but Chu Wenbiao, the principal of Shid Middle School, directly called the Forestry Bureau to report the incident. The approximate situation currently available is: the deceased was a 15-year-old junior high school girl named Zhang Wan. Due to the militarized management of Shid Middle School, all students have to live in dormitories, so when the lights were turned off last night, her roommates still saw her in bed. But in the morning, I found that she was not in the dormitory. Several roommates thought she had gone to the classroom, so they didn't think much about it. During recess, a few boys who looked like gangsters sneaked together to smoke under the abandoned teaching building, and accidentally discovered Zhang Wan, who had fallen from the building. The boys were so frightened that they immediately informed the school leaders. The first time. Although the school called an ambulance in accordance with the regulations, in fact, he had lost his vital signs a long time ago. It was just an electrocardiogram to prove the fact of death. At present, in accordance with the requirements of the Forestry Bureau, the crime scene has been cordoned off by school security, and the body has been put in a body bag for the time being before being taken to the funeral home, so that we can look for specific clues. Because the discoverer was a student, the news spread throughout the school, and many media got the news. It is related to minors, and the media has received the news again. If the truth cannot be found in time, that would be troublesome. That the meaning of Xu Changsheng's last words. Su Ming and Shenlin knew very well that no matter what kind of crime it was always related to minors. Then it will inevitably be amplified by the media, and may even be coerced by various public opinions. By then, even if the truth is found, as long as it is inconsistent with what the people think, it will cause turmoil and loss of credibility. So, not only must we find the truth, but we must also find out the truth, and make it public before public opinion takes hold and no one starts to take the lead. Shenlin fiddled with the lock of the forensic toolbox and asked with a slight frown. Has the body of the deceased been collected? That will definitely cause some interference to the autopsy. If you want to find the truth as soon as possible, then you should not touch the body before we arrive. Xu Changsheng sighed helplessly, shrugged his shoulders and said meaningfully, "No way. The ability to temporarily leave the body in the school is the result of the Forest Bureau's best efforts. Although immobilizing the body is the best way for us to find clues and determine the real cause of death. But how dare the school do nothing? Even if it can be determined at a glance that the person who fell has lost his vital signs, in order to silence the parents and the media, an ambulance must be called immediately. Calling an ambulance is not enough. The body must be disposed of properly and placed in a coffin as soon as possible. If you really dare to do nothing, just leave the body and wait for our police to come over. The media, parents, and even netizens will make the school realize what the power of public opinion is and what online violence is. Anyway, no matter what the specific process is, what the specific circumstances are, or what the specific reasons are, as long as something happens to a student at school, the school will not be able to escape the blame. Middle schools are not kindergartens. It is impossible for teachers to follow every student. The key is for parents to pay more attention to their children's psychology. According to past experience, there is an 80% probability that campus cases are related to the student's family environment. Paying more attention to your own children can reduce the occurrence of such tragedies, which is really better than anything else. Forget it, it's useless to talk about these things. Let's just hope that this case is not difficult to solve. Otherwise, those media and parents are enough for our team to eat a pot. Xu Changsheng's words made Shen Lin nod slightly in agreement. Indeed, if you want to reduce campus crimes and cases, relying on teachers and school authorities alone is not of much use. The key lies in parents, and Su Ming, who was sitting in the co-pilot, he was puzzled by Xu Changsheng's words and keenly caught an important detail. Brother Sheng. Are the other students in the dormitory where the deceased lives not in the same class as her? Because it's what you said just now. Other people in the dormitory woke up in the morning and found that the deceased was not in bed, thinking that she had gone to the classroom. But during class, these people did not wonder because the deceased was not in the class and chose to tell the teacher. You know. According to the time, the deceased should have fallen from the building and lost vital signs at this time, and it is impossible for her to go to class again. But why? After 2 classes, during the break, the body was discovered by those bad boys? These inferences. It seems that the only explanation is that the deceased and the others in the dormitory are not in the same class, right? Because they don't live together, will the deceased be excluded by the class? And finally take this extreme road of no return. When Su Ming finished this inference, Xu Changsheng, who was sitting in the driver's seat, was already shocked, and looked at Su Ming in disbelief. I don't understand it at all. What kind of inference ability and talent for solving cases is needed to be able to solve the case without even seeing the crime scene? Just based on the case information, he said, he came to such a detailed conclusion. And this conclusion, it is completely consistent with the elements of reasoning, and people can't find any reason to refute it. It's not just Xu Changsheng. Shen Lin, who was sitting in the back seat, also slightly opened her beautiful eyes and looked at the passenger seat, raised her gold-rimmed half-frame glasses and thought about it. Chapter 25 Bizarre. The wrist cut on the fallen body. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The police car rushed all the way to the gate of Shid Middle School. Su Ming turned his head and looked out of the car window. He found that many cars were parked at the school gate. Remember the domain name of this site, Taiwan Novel Network. There were several official cars with passes from the Huaihai District Education Bureau, and several interview cars from unknown media. As for the remaining cars, they were basically parents who got the news and came here because they were afraid that their children would get into trouble. It was obvious, this incident is currently slowly fermenting. The police car also stopped at the school gate. Zhang Heng, vice principal of Shid Middle School, had been waiting here for a long time. He immediately welcomed Su Ming and the other 2 into the school, and did not give the media who were eyeing them a chance to interview him. He took the 3 people to the crime scene in the abandoned teaching building, and sighed with mixed emotions. Hey, I really don't know how this happened. Our Shid Middle School has always been a model school in the surrounding area, and it is second to none in terms of academic performance and school spirit. Now the leaders of the Education Bureau and major media are paying more and more attention to this matter. I would like to ask you all who have come from afar to find out the truth of this incident as soon as possible, minimize the impact, and at least keep the brand of this first-level standard school. Xu Changsheng nodded expressionlessly, responding without any emotion. Don't worry, Vice Principal Zhang. Since Director Lin sent the 3 of us to your school, we will definitely do our best to investigate this falling case. However, on the way to the scene now, I just want to ask. There is more detailed information about the deceased student Zhang Wan, such as family situation, class grades, social friends and other information. Vice Principal Zhang, do you know about these situations? In response to Xu Changsheng's question, Zhang Heng wiped the sweat from his forehead awkwardly and continued to sigh. How can I understand? If I could have discovered the abnormality of this classmate earlier, I would definitely have tried my best to prevent this tragedy from happening, and it wouldn't have turned out like this. But if you officers need it, I will ask Zhang Wan's class teacher to come and cooperate with the investigation. After all, no matter what the result is, we hope to find out the reason why Zhang Wan chose to jump off the building to commit suicide as soon as possible. As soon as the voice fell, Shen Lin, who was wearing gold-rimmed half-frame glasses, raised her eyebrows and sneered. Oh. Vice Principal Zhang is so confident. We haven't even arrived at the scene to check it out, and you think it's suicide by jumping off the building? Is there no possibility of homicide? These words, Zhang Heng was stunned for a moment, and he didn't know how to respond immediately. Xu Changsheng helplessly covered his mouth and coughed twice to ease the awkward atmosphere. Don't mind, Vice Principal Zhang. Forensic Dr. Shen is the trump card of our Huaihai criminal investigation team. She has always believed that only corpses can't lie. So before she saw the body of the deceased, she was skeptical about the cause of death. By the way, let's find the deceased's class teacher. We may ask about the specific situation and details later. Zhang Heng nodded quickly and pointed to the cordon in front. I understand. Be more rigorous. We really need to be more rigorous. Okay, the abandoned teaching building is in front. The place surrounded by the cordon is the scene of the fall. Principal Chu is handling the work there. 3 police officers, just go there directly. I will go to the deceased's class teacher now. I hope to find the truth as soon as possible. The pressure from the Education Bureau is really great. Then, Zhang Heng stopped, walked to the side, took out his mobile phone and contacted the deceased's class teacher. Xu Changsheng didn't care either. He pressed his palm forward and said, "Get ready to work." Although these school leaders must hope. The cause of death was suicide, and they can keep their first-level standard school, but we must not be affected by so-called expectations. Finding the truth is what we should do. After the voice fell, Xu Changsheng took the lead to walk into the cordon, and the principal of Shid Middle School, Chu Wenbiao, who was surrounded in the middle and was asking about the situation, turned his head and looked at the remainder of the people next to him, seeing Xu Changsheng, Su Ming and Shen Lin in police uniforms. He breathed a sigh of relief and hurried forward to hold Xu Changsheng's hand. Captain Su, right? Director Lin mentioned to me before that you have rich experience in solving cases. I'm sorry to bother you this time. Find out the specific reason why this classmate fell from the building as soon as possible. The pressure I am under is really great. Xu Changsheng pulled his hand out without showing any expression. He didn't say anything more because Chu Wenbiao mentioned Lin Tian. He just nodded expressionlessly in response. Don't worry, Principal Chu, we are here to find the truth. But now, please ask irrelevant people to leave here first, so as not to affect our work and not to pollute the crime scene. After we have inspected the crime scene and come to the final conclusion, we will give you the truth without any human feelings or falsehoods as soon as possible. Of course, there is no need to mix in human feelings, as long as it is the truth. Chu Wenbiao quickly said that he was not afraid of the shadow of his own uprightness, and then looked around and waved and shouted. Everyone disperse. Don't stand in the cordon to affect the work of the police officers. As for how Chu Wenbiao arranged those security guards and school leaders, the 3 people who came with the mission did not care at all, but locked their eyes on the falling scene a few meters away, although a few hours have passed, but the dried blood flowing like a stream is enough to explain the previous tragic situation. At the same time, next to the dried blood, there is also a black body bag, which contains the body of the deceased. In this case, obviously, the first scene of the crime has been destroyed, but if it weren't for Lin Tian's forced struggle, it is estimated that the body of the deceased has been sent to the funeral home. Shen Lin walked to the body bag, kneeling on one knee. He opened the forensic toolbox, took out the rubber gloves and put them on, and made preparations for a simple autopsy. Under normal circumstances, forensic autopsies need to be performed at police stations or funeral homes, and cameras must be used to record in real time. However, this case is urgent and involves minors, therefore, only in this special environment, without surgery, can we rely on experience to find the specific cause of death. Su Ming and Xu Changsheng also stood next to Shen Lin. they planned to take a look at the specific situation of the deceased first, and then explore the crime scene in order to find clues in a targeted manner. A few seconds later, Shenlin had made all preparations and immediately opened the body bag. What came into view? It was a very young face, and the blood stains on the face caused by the fall were wiped clean by the doctor in the ambulance before, but the skull was obviously deformed, and the limbs were morbidly twisted due to fractures, and even broken bones pierced the skin, which looked extremely hideous. If the doctor had not simply treated it before, the specific appearance would probably be even more terrifying. But none of the three people present had any expression, not only because they had long lost interest in corpses, but also because their eyes were all focused on the left wrist of the deceased, because there was a deep cut on the wrist that was so deep that the bone could be seen. Chapter 26. Someone wants to make sure she dies 100%. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This hideous wound that was so deep that the bone could be seen, compared to those so-called exposed broken bones and deformed skulls, it attracted the three people's attention even more. Because, the three people in the criminal investigation system knew very well how bizarre and special it was to have a wrist cut on a fallen body. At least, although Shenlin had come into contact with hundreds of fallen bodies in these years, none of them had a similar situation. Contained the astonishment in his eyes, Shenlin raised the left wrist of the deceased, took a closer look, and frowned. This wrist cut was obviously not caused by the deceased himself. Because the wound is located on the left wrist, according to the normal way of exerting force, if the right hand is holding the knife to cut, the cutting direction must be from the outside to the inside. It is absolutely impossible to be from the inside to the outside like now, which does not conform to the human body's normal routine. Wrist cuts can cause this special wound from the inside to the outside. According to past experience, it is basically another person standing opposite, holding a sharp weapon to cut, and the direction of the wound can be from the inside to the outside. Shenlin's words are shocking, because, according to this speculation, in addition to the deceased himself, there are other people involved in this case. This factor undoubtedly increases the uncertainty and severity of the case by several times. As long as there are other people in the case, there is a possibility of homicide. Xu Changsheng frowned slightly. As an experienced criminal policeman, he is naturally very clear: campus homicide and campus suicide. It seems that there is only one word different in the classification of cases. How big is the difference in impact and public opinion? Then he took a deep breath and said calmly, "Forensic Dr. Shen, please check carefully. The specific cause of death of this child, is it due to excessive bleeding from wrist cutting, or falling to death? Or is there a possibility? The possibility of being forced to cut wrists and finally pretending to fall to death. It is obvious, if this case is likely to constitute a homicide, then the degree of attention will be different. The golden 48 hours is an important node that must be seized." Before Shenlin answered, Su Ming, who was standing next to him, carefully observed the bloodstains on the ground, then looked up at the height and distance of the abandoned teaching building, and answered slowly. "Brother Sheng, the deceased should most likely have committed suicide, and in my opinion, this hideous cut on the wrist was most likely cut by someone else after falling from the building. First of all, why do you say it was suicide? You can take a look at the bloodstains from falling from the building. The distance from the teaching building is about 2 meters. According to our criminal investigation experience, if the victim was pushed down the building, or thrown down the building after death, due to the weight, most of them would fall to death within 1 meter of the building. But if they jumped down by themselves, because of inertia and parabolas, the basic distance from the building can be about 1.5 meters. But now, the distance between the bloodstains of the deceased and the building is about 2 meters, not 1.5 meters, let alone 1 meter. This shows that the deceased most likely used all his strength to jump back, and his hands were in an open embrace, so that the traces of falling from the building could be 2 meters away. So it can be basically confirmed that the deceased jumped down by himself, not pushed or thrown down by others." Speaking of this, Su Ming paused for a moment, and after searching for several seconds on the ground, he did not find the scattered blood drops he wanted to see, so he shook his head and continued. "As for why I said that the wound on the wrist was most likely caused by someone else after the fall, This is because the wound on the wrist of the deceased is very deep, and the radial artery has been completely cut, which means that the amount of bleeding will be extremely large, and there is no possibility of self-clotting. Based on the human body's tolerance, a normal person who cuts the radial artery will enter a state of near hemorrhagic shock with weakness and dizziness in 2 minutes at most. And in this state, a normal person can't climb up the railing at all, let alone jump down from the building. Of course, there is also a possibility that the deceased did not need any psychological preparation immediately after the radial artery was cut, and he climbed up the railing and jumped off the building and died. If so, it is indeed possible that the person jumped off the building before the blood loss and shock. But I think it is probably difficult for a junior high school student to endure the pain caused by this deep wound that can be seen to the bone, and to have the courage to jump off the building without any hesitation or psychological preparation. In order to prevent this deceased person from being so extreme, he has no attachment to the world. I just looked carefully and found that there were no blood drops with a high degree of splashing on the ground near the traces of the fall. I didn't even see a single drop of blood. If the radial artery was cut before the fall, I think with the blood pressure of the artery, there would definitely be a lot of blood drops splashing in the air. But now, there is nothing at all. This is enough to prove that shortly after the deceased fell, or within a few minutes, a person came to her side and cut the radial artery on her left wrist in order to the purpose of 100% death. Hiss. Xu Changsheng took a deep breath subconsciously and looked at Su Ming with his scalp numb in disbelief. Although in the previous 2 cases, Su Ming has shown extremely terrifying talent for reasoning and solving crimes, but Xu Changsheng is still not used to it and is not completely numb yet, or rather, Su Ming's mastery of criminal investigation knowledge, as well as this ability to infer almost 100% and restore a series of criminal processes with just one detailed clue is really impossible to ignore, and you will be amazed and shocked every time, just as if Su Ming had experienced these cases personally before, so there was no difficulty at all. Shenlin, who was wearing rubber gloves, glanced at Su Ming with trembling eyes and suppressed her habit of raising her glasses. Without any hesitation, he immediately examined the body in more detail, especially the fatal injuries. Xu Changsheng wisely said nothing and quietly waited for Shenlin's detailed autopsy results. The surroundings were quiet and depressing. 3 minutes later, after Shenlin completed a rough inspection, she looked at Su Ming with a complicated look and nodded. Officer Su Ming is right. The wound on the wrist is indeed a secondary injury caused by others after the deceased fell from the building. The reason why I came to this conclusion is because of my rough autopsy just now. It can be roughly concluded. The deceased fell from the building while lying on his back. The back of his head and skull were shattered. His limbs were fractured due to the force of the impact. His spine was broken into 5 sections. 3 ribs were broken and fractured, one of which was inserted into his lung. Judging from the severity of the injury, it looks very serious overall. However, since the heart was not damaged, he may still be breathing when he fell, but he must be unable to be saved. At the same time, according to the analysis of the degree and range of coagulation in each wound, the coagulation range of the radial artery in the wrist is obviously lower than that of other injured parts. Since the total amount of blood in the human body is limited, if it cannot be stopped, the earlier the bleeding occurs, the wider the coagulation range formed by platelets will naturally be. But now, compared with several major wounds, the scope and degree of coagulation in the radial artery are obviously lower. In addition, the deceased may not have died completely when he first fell. This proves beyond a doubt. Speaking of which, Shenlin paused for 2 seconds, looked directly into the eyes of Su Ming and Xu Changsheng, and said solemnly, "Someone is going to make sure she is 100% dead." Chapter 27 The Clean Stairs, The Disappeared Evidence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Someone's going to make sure she's 100% dead. Shenlin's last words undoubtedly made the atmosphere tense, and Xu Changsheng narrowed his eyes slightly. Who could it be? Want to make a 15-year-old junior high school girl die 100%? He had already fallen from a tall building, and when there was obviously no need to rescue him, he even had to cut his radial artery. Writing this, I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network. Take a deep breath. Xu Changsheng stared at the pale face of the deceased and said solemnly. Regardless of the final real cause of death, it was due to falling from a high altitude or excessive blood loss from the radial artery. Now it is basically 100% certain that there is a second person in this case, and we cannot even rule out the possibility of more people. The most important thing is, I don't think this case can be defined as a suicide fall. Because it is still unclear whether the deceased was forced by others or suffered some other threats before falling. It's like seeing something you shouldn't have seen, and you were forced to jump from a high building to your death. At the same time, the person specially cut the deceased's radial artery to ensure that something would not be leaked. But regardless of the specific circumstances, this case occurred on campus, and the deceased was a minor student. It is an extremely bad criminal case. So we must find out the truth as soon as possible. The words just fell. Su Ming, who was standing nearby, took over the conversation, pointed upward at the abandoned teaching building in front of him, and said seriously. Brother Sheng. I plan to go to the specific place where the deceased fell. Maybe I can find some other clues to the case. The key is to check whether there are any relevant traces left by the second person. I always feel that this case is a bit too strange and not as simple as it seems. That it's obvious. Su Ming, who has extensive criminal experience, has always felt that this case was a bit strange, and he is currently more puzzled by one thing, that is, why did the deceased fall on his back with his hands spread out? To know, this kind of falling posture is suicide, and it must be a posture that is only used when you are very willing and yearn for total liberation. Many patients with depression will use this posture when jumping off a building. When falling, I looked up at the sky, feeling the inertia of the free fall as the wind roared beside my ears, and spread my hands in parallel like soaring wings. Until his body was hit hard and fell to the ground, losing consciousness and waiting for death. If you are forced to jump off a building, then this position will never be used. The human body's self-protection consciousness will try to land with both feet first. There are so many things that go against common sense in this case, no conclusion can be drawn yet, and further exploration is needed to find clues. In addition to the clues on the body, the fall point and interpersonal relationships also need further understanding and analysis. Now, regarding Su Ming's idea, Xu Changsheng nodded in agreement, and then looked at Shen Lindao. Forensic Dr. Shen. Here you conduct a more detailed autopsy in order to discover more critical clues. Xiao Mingze and I went to this abandoned teaching building to see if there is any key evidence. After saying that, Shen Lin didn't answer anything, just nodded lightly, then knelt down on one knee to inspect the body, but this time, she had already taken out special tools such as cotton swabs, forceps, syringes, etc. from the autopsy kit. It was obviously necessary to conduct a more detailed autopsy without damaging the body in an effort to discover important evidence. Su Ming and Xu Changsheng quickly entered the abandoned teaching building without any further delay. This old teaching building has 6 floors. It was abandoned after Shid Middle School built a new teaching building 3 years ago. Although the overall structure is stable, it cannot be called a dangerous building, but things aren't looking too good inside. A lot of wall coverings visible to the naked eye have peeled off. Black spots and mold caused by moisture have basically filled the walls, and the nose is filled with bursts of musty odor. It can be guessed that since this teaching building was abandoned, the school has no longer sent people to manage and support it. As for why it wasn't demolished, it is probably because the cost of dismantling it is also a huge expense. Walk to the stairs of the abandoned teaching building. Xu Changsheng looked at the stairs full of footprints, as well as cigarette butts and beer bottles everywhere on the corridor, shook his head and said helplessly. Xiao Ming. It seems that the school's decision to abandon this building has made it easier for those junior high school students and gangsters. It's true that no one will notice you hiding here to smoke and drink. At least the school leaders won't come to this kind of place. But we just went upstairs and saw beer bottles and so many cigarette butts, which is good news for us. Basically certain. The activity range of those gangsters is probably around the corridors on the first and second floors, and does not extend to places higher up. In that case, The deceased's footprint information should be able to be left through this dust. Su Changsheng's somewhat optimistic words did not immediately receive Su Ming's approval. He looked down at the footprints on the corridor. Su Ming had already discovered that there were many footprints extending to higher floors, and they were basically moving in pairs. At the same time, most of them had one footprint that was larger and the other smaller, and the number was not small. Su Ming immediately thought of something, looked sideways at the corner of the floor, and pointed to indicate. Brother Sheng, you are wrong to say that. I'm afraid this abandoned teaching building is not just the base of those little gangsters. At least I think there are many young couples who are precocious and hormonal, and they definitely don't want this secret dating place to be monopolized by little gangsters. As soon as these words came out, Xu Changsheng was stunned for a moment, and wanted to say something, but he looked along Su Ming's finger, seeing the torn light pink square package, he couldn't help but frown. Are junior high school students so precocious? No, after this case is over, I have to ask Principal Chu to pay attention to the school spirit and discipline. Otherwise, who knows when the case of abandoning a newborn baby in the toilet will happen here. As the floors go up, the number of footprints has obviously become less and less, and it seems that the footprints of the deceased can be identified. When the two walked to the 5th floor and were about to step towards the top floor, they suddenly stopped at the same time and looked at each other, with some surprise and solemnity, because, this corridor from the 5th floor to the 6th floor, I don't know who has cleaned it, and there is no footprint at all. It's so clean that there is not much dust. Chapter 28 The Deceased's Suicide Note. Fuck this shit world. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Compared with the previous 5-story corridor, this 6th floor seems too weird and totally out of common sense. It is so clean that it is obviously specially cleaned by someone. All footprints have been wiped clean, as if to hide some traces and clues. Su Ming stared at the stairs leading to the balcony on the 6th floor, bent down and gently wiped it twice, and saw a layer of dust on the tip of his finger and said, "Gently wipe the stairs, and you can see a layer of light dust on the tip of your finger. Since this abandoned teaching building has not been taken care of for 3 years, dust can easily float in from all places. It will be dusty again soon after cleaning. Judging from the dust level of this staircase, someone should have swept away their footprints last night, when the deceased fell from the building. This can be confirmed. In addition to the deceased, there are other people who followed to the top floor." Su Ming's skill of using dust to infer time. Xu Changsheng nodded in admiration. "That's right, Xiao Ming. I didn't expect that the dust on the stairs could bring you useful clues. Now we can only hope. There are still traces on the balcony that have not been destroyed. We can find the key clues and further restore the truth of the matter." The two continued to move forward, after carefully checking to make sure that the stairs were swept very clean and there were no clues left. They slowly came to the rooftop, walked to the rooftop. Xu Changsheng looked at the scene in front of him, sighed with a bit of discomfort in his heart, and shook his head. What a pity. They are still children who have not grown up. Su Ming pursed his lips and did not speak, but he knew very well in his heart, Xu Changsheng felt sorry that the female student left like this. She was still a child with a bright future, but she chose to leave the world in this way. Because, now there are no traces of fighting, dried blood, or messy horror scenes in front of the two, only, a neatly placed Winnie the Pooh tablecloth, which should have been full of dust around it, is now also cleaned very cleanly. On the tablecloth, there were 2 bottles of calcium milk with straws, and next to them were several bags of spicy strips and potato chips, and a small desk lamp for late-night reading, and a light pink envelope placed in the middle. You can imagine, last night, the deceased spent the last time on this tablecloth with another unknown witness. The two may have talked about idols, the past, the secret crush they never confessed to, or the dreams they would never have the chance to realize. They talked until the snacks were finished and the drinks were finished, the final choice. He jumped off the abandoned teaching building in a backward posture that seemed to enjoy himself, it can be said. This scene in front of him, it overturned the speculation that Xu Changsheng had previously deduced that the deceased was forced by someone to fall to his death, because if you are in a situation of being forced, you will never see the rooftop like this now, neat, clean, and quiet. If the body of the deceased was not still downstairs, you would subconsciously think, this is a tea party where junior high school girls whisper. Xu Changsheng first took a picture of this scene to avoid losing some key evidence when moving things later, then he slowly walked forward and picked up the pink envelope placed in the middle of the tablecloth. After taking a look, he handed it to Su Ming and gestured. Xiao Ming, come and take a look. There are even a few words written on this envelope. Help me hand it over to the police uncle. Why? Why would such a good child choose to go to this step? That it's obvious. Seeing this warm scene on the rooftop, Xu Changsheng can roughly determine that there is no forced murder in this case, and there is a high probability of suicide. But even if it is suicide, the wound on the wrist of the deceased, which was obviously caused by falling from the building, also needs a reasonable explanation. Su Ming was also a little surprised, and even more puzzled by the scene on the rooftop. However, previously, because the deceased fell from the building with his back facing up, he had always felt something was wrong, so he had already prepared himself mentally. At this moment, Su Ming looked at the pink envelope in his hand, and then gestured to Xu Changsheng. Brother Sheng. Shall I open this envelope first? I always feel that there are still some problems with this case, and I hope to get some clues from this letter. Xu Changsheng gently waved his hand, indicating that Su Ming could just open it and take a look. He squatted down slightly, carefully checking the straw on the calcium milk and the edge of the spicy strip packaging bag, hoping to find another person's DNA traces from them. Now, to understand the specific process of this case, finding the person who chatted with the deceased here is naturally the best solution and is extremely important. Su Ming focused all his attention on the envelope, and after slowly opening it, the beautiful handwriting came into view. Well, sorry, police uncle, did I cause you trouble? I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, I hope I haven't caused you any big trouble. By the way, police uncle, you don't have to waste time looking for the murderer. This is my own decision. It has nothing to do with other people, and no one forced me to do this. Why did I make this decision? Because I feel that it doesn't matter whether I exist in this world or not. Some people are destined to be redundant, right? And I'm too tired, really, really tired. So I want to be completely relaxed, and never have to worry about being relaxed when I'm awake. I've heard a saying before, when a person disappears from other people's memories, it means that he is no longer in this world. Some people will be remembered forever, some people may disappear completely in 100 years, and some people may completely disappear in just a dozen years. Well, if it were me, I would probably only make others sad for a few months, and then be forgotten by others in the last few years, and disappear from this world from then on. If there is an afterlife, I hope to become a blue whale in the ocean, because it is big enough, strong enough, free enough, and precious enough to be seen by people at a glance. I've said too much. Anyway, this is my own decision. The police don't need to continue investigating. Wait, let me curse one last time. Go to this shitty world. I don't want to come back in my next life. Chapter 29. An important clue is found, and the suspect is also going to commit suicide. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This seems like a playful suicide note, or rather, it shouldn't be called a suicide note, because there is no regret or unwillingness written in it. He didn't explain his funeral like others did, but when Su Ming held it in his hand, he felt unspeakably heavy and sad, because, although there is no fear in this letter, regret and misery are written in every word, especially that sentence, never come again in the next life. Silence for a few seconds. Su Ming closed his eyes slightly and slowly suppressed some complicated emotions. Although simulated crime 100,000 times, he also became a brutal murderer countless times. The heart should be as cold as ice, but this is not a simulation, but a real reality of flesh and blood, and people are often emotional. While closing your eyes, Su Ming kept asking himself questions in his mind, trying to sort out his thoughts and find the correct answer. Did the deceased commit suicide? If it was suicide, why was the radial artery on the left wrist still cut? Why didn't the girl who spent the last period of time here with the deceased choose to dissuade him? On the contrary, it seems to be very cooperative. Why was the dust on the stairs on the 6th floor swept away in order to hide the footprints? but the garbage on the rooftop was not disposed of, leaving traces of my own DNA. Is it possible that the items on the rooftop were deliberately placed by the murderer in order to make it look like the deceased committed suicide, creating a perfect crime? The deceased said that he was redundant. Have his parents divorced and started their own families? What does the dispensability in the letter mean? Have a bad relationship with your classmates? Or suicide due to depression caused by school violence? Put away objects that may contain DNA. Xu Changsheng stood up and asked curiously when he saw Su Ming closing his eyes slightly. Xiao Ming, why are you closing your eyes? Are there any key clues in this letter? Or have you inferred any useful information? Su Ming, who had almost sorted out his thoughts, opened his eyes in time, handed the envelope to Xu Changsheng and replied. Brother Sheng, you can read this letter. These are not the last words, but the words left by the deceased for us. Then I will summarize the only clues we have so far and summarize the general inferences we can get. Speaking of which, Su Ming paused for 2 seconds, inferred various clues and continued. First. At present, it should be confirmed that the deceased committed suicide. The posture of falling on his back is very special. I can't find any other possibility except that he jumped on his own. But even though he jumped on his own, we cannot rule out the possibility that the suspect used drugs or mental cues to control the deceased in extreme circumstances. Because it's in the previous case files. There have also been special cases where the victim was controlled by drugs or mentally suggestive, leading to the final suicide. As for, I have 3 guesses about why the deceased's left wrist artery was cut. First, before the deceased fell, she asked her companions who came to the rooftop together to give her a chance to die peacefully if they found her alive after going downstairs. Second, the companion saw that the deceased was still alive and could not bear her suffering, so he chose to cut the radial artery of the deceased. Third, the whole thing may have been influenced by other people. Under this person's instruction or request, the companion must ensure that the deceased died. No matter which of these 3 conjectures, I believe that the person who cut the radial artery of the deceased was the companion who was chatting and eating snacks with the deceased. So I think the key question is. It is necessary to determine the specific identity of the companion, or tentatively called the suspect, as soon as possible. Because in my opinion, this person has too many doubts. If the 2 were friends, why did they not show any signs of trying to dissuade the deceased from committing suicide, and finally caused secondary harm to the deceased? Secondly, the dust on the 6th floor has been swept away. I don't want to leave any footprints, but I don't care if the DNA traces left on the rooftop can explain one thing. Footprints are easier to find her than DNA. As well as. You think our police will definitely be able to find her in the end, so you don't process your DNA and just hide the footprints in the hope that she won't be found too early? And the most important thing. By being able to drink calcium milk, eat spicy potato chips, and sit and chat with the deceased, we can basically infer that this person is most likely to be the same age as the deceased. How come you have such a strong psychological quality when you are so young? It is really strange to see that the deceased who fell from the building did not have any fear at all, and could even step forward and cut the radial artery with a sharp knife. It makes me extremely suspicious. It is very likely that not only 2 middle school students were involved in this case, but there may also be people behind the scenes, but the situation cannot be determined based on inference alone. At last. Brother Sheng, I think we must act in 2 ways. On the one hand, we need to understand the family situation and interpersonal relationships of the deceased, find the real reason for his suicide, and find out whether the deceased has been in this state for a long time, or whether there are factors that were deliberately guided by others. On the other hand, we need to search for the suspect who witnessed this case. According to the clues we have obtained so far, we can infer. The suspect should be between 14 and 17 years old, female, and should have a good relationship with the deceased, or one of the deceased's only friends. Based on the suspect's practice of wiping off footprints but leaving DNA, I think the suspect is likely to have a defect in his legs. He is also a type of person who is excluded and ignored in school. Since the two have similar experiences, they can become pretty good friends. There is also a very high probability of one thing. That is, from the suspect's current practice of covering up her whereabouts, it is very likely that she is not trying to escape, but simply to let us find her later. Why are you not afraid of being found, but worried about being found too early? If you think about it in an extreme way, it is very likely that the suspect is also going to commit suicide. At this moment, when Su Ming finished his inference, Xu Changsheng also finished reading the letter left by the deceased, but he didn't have time to say anything, and immediately returned to the stairs, turned on the flashlight and looked for something in the dusty stairs on the 5th floor. Half a minute later, among a pile of faint footprints, Xu Changsheng found a footprint against the wall, with the front sole of the foot touching the ground and the back sole floating. Moreover, it was not just a coincidence. Looking carefully, you can clearly see that there are such footprints on every step. Xu Changsheng's eyes condensed slightly. He didn't expect that the suspect had a more obvious disease in his legs, just as Su Ming had just deduced, but the most important thing is, according to Su Ming, this suspect is also going to commit suicide. Chapter 30 Depression progresses too fast. Someone is inducing the deceased to commit suicide. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Suspect. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Or the word witness. Google search TWKN. Perhaps neither of them can accurately describe the second special person in this case. It can be confirmed. In the short time after falling from the building, she cut the radial artery of the deceased and caused secondary injury, however. According to the warm picture on the tablecloth on the rooftop and the letter left by the deceased, she is more like the only friend who accompanied the deceased on the last journey. But no matter what her identity is, anyone who wants to thoroughly understand this case must find this person. At this moment, under Su Ming's reminder, Xu Changsheng immediately reacted. Indeed, according to the current details, this suspect who witnessed the deceased falling from the building, it is also very likely that he committed suicide, otherwise why only wiped off the footprints? At the same time, Xu Changsheng also considered another point. Even if these two children are ignored and bullied by the people around them, it is not so easy to make the decision to commit suicide, not to mention that both of them made this decision. Does this mean, just as Su Ming guessed, there is actually a big hand behind the fall, inducing and controlling everything, without thinking too long? Xu Changsheng immediately walked up a few steps and called at the door of the rooftop. Xiao Ming. The follow-up investigation will be carried out as you said, roughly divided into two aspects, but the focus should be on exploring and finding the suspect. This is the most important line at present, and it must not be broken. Let's go down first. Let the technical department clean up the things here, and hope to find other useful clues. After determining the focus of the investigation target, Su Ming and Xu Changsheng walked down the abandoned teaching building slowly, and did not forget to continue to observe the dust traces during the period, but there were no other extra discoveries. Walking out of the abandoned teaching building, found that Shenlin had pulled up the body bag and was taking off rubber gloves, frowning and slightly solemn, obviously. This was during the detailed autopsy. There were other additional discoveries. Xu Changsheng then stepped forward and asked hurriedly. Forensic Dr. Shen. Do you have any new discoveries? Shenlin said solemnly while cleaning the autopsy tools. Just when you two went up, I lifted the clothes on the deceased's arm and found a large number of small knife cuts. According to the direction of the cuts, it can be judged as self-harm. Most of them have healed and scabbed. Only a few were caused not long ago, but they must be earlier than the time of falling from the building. But what makes me very strange is, even though there are so many wounds on the arm, there is no knife scar, which undoubtedly shows the deceased's self-harm behavior only started during this period of time. But if depression caused suicide, there should be a lot of normal in the early stage. At least the self-harm behavior should have appeared for at least a few months. It gradually developed into self-harm in the end. Why can the emotional progress be so fast? When Shenlin finished speaking, Su Ming suddenly thought of something and asked hurriedly. Forensic Dr. Shenlin. Have you collected the deceased's blood? Can you test it immediately to see if there are any drug residues in it? Especially check if there are any traces of drugs. After the words fell, Xu Changsheng suddenly understood something and clapped his hands in realization. Yes. According to the results of the autopsy, the deceased progressed from self-mutilation to suicide in a very short period of time. According to the course of depression, this is obviously too fast. It is very likely. The influence of certain drugs caused the deceased's mood to change so quickly, and as a 15-year-old middle school student, how could he get those drugs? If residues are detected in the blood, it can prove someone is guiding the deceased to commit suicide. Su Ming, who was standing next to him, nodded in agreement. It can be seen, to be the captain of Huaihai criminal investigation, Xu Changsheng's ability to solve cases is definitely not bad. Immediately judged from the self-mutilation wound on his arm, this case, there is always someone secretly controlling everything. Shen Lin also understood what he meant, and immediately put on the rubber gloves he had just taken off, and said without hesitation. Originally, I thought, a middle school student who is only 15 years old must not be in a hurry to test drugs and drug residues. Just wait until we return to the technical department for detailed testing. But now it seems this case is not as simple as it seems. Give me some time. Start testing the blood of the deceased now. After saying that, Shen Lin opened the forensic toolbox, took out the test tube containing the deceased's blood, shook it gently, and dripped it on the drug and drug residue test paper respectively. At the same time, Su Ming and Xu Changsheng had already seen the vice principal, Zhang Heng, walking towards here with a middle-aged woman in her 40s with a sad face. No need to think too much. This woman is most likely the deceased's class teacher. Xu Changsheng patted Su Ming's shoulder and took out his mobile phone from his pocket. Xiao Ming, you talk to them first. I'll notify the people in the technical department to turn on the Sky Eye surveillance near Shid Middle School last night to see if there is any trace of another person. This case, it's getting more and more serious. From the simple suicide fall at the beginning, to the subsequent discovery of the wrist-cut wound, to the current existence of malicious induction, I have to say, the case is indeed gradually developing in a more serious style. Finding the truth, it is also more urgent. Su Ming walked towards the oncoming vice principal Zhang and the middle-aged woman, stopped the two in front of the cordon, and pointed to the chair not far away. It's not very convenient here. We have to deal with a lot of clues and affairs. Let's go over there and talk. Zhang Heng nodded quickly, walked with the middle-aged woman to a chair not far away and sat down, and introduced them with a tap of his fingers. Officer Su. This is Zhang Wan's class teacher, Wang Limei. She has been working in our Shid Middle School for nearly 20 years and has taught more than a dozen graduating classes. Both her teaching philosophy and her class teaching experience are outstanding. There are not many people in the whole school who can be as conscientious and experienced as Teacher Wang. As Zhang Heng finished speaking, Su Ming had already frowned slightly, keenly discovered a hint of problem from her words, and looked at Wang Limei and asked aloud. Teacher Wang. Before asking about Zhang Wan, I want to ask one other thing first. Normally, there are only a few months left before the high school entrance exam. Even if the head teacher of the graduating class has no classes that day, he will go to the class to check the general situation during the morning reading time every day. As a graduating class teacher for more than 10 years, you should also have this habit. So, during the morning reading, until the end of the two classes in the morning, did you notice that Zhang Wan was not in her seat?